Hola a todos. This video is going to be about how to conjugate into the past subjunctive. This will only focus on the construction of the conjugation, and it won't deal with the uses of the subjunctive. So if you're looking for the uses, that will be in another video. This one is just on how to form it. Now you can see here I have the title El imperfecto de subjuntivo, and that is typically what I refer to this conjugation as. But you can see these other options, el pretérito imperfecto de subjuntivo. That's also used as is el subjuntivo pasado. So I tend to hear el imperfecto de subjuntivo more frequently, but I will also come across el pretérito imperfecto de subjuntivo pretty often, and less common, el subjuntivo pasado. So anyways, I'm going to go forward and refer to it as el imperfecto de subjuntivo. And this conjugation is actually pretty basic. There are 3 rules to it, and it is remarkably consistent. What you will do is follow these 3 steps, and this is similar to the process that we use when we conjugate in the present subjunctive. When we conjugate in the presente de subjuntivo, where we go to the yo form, drop the o, add the opposite ending. Real simple, but not really, because the yo form had all sorts of irregularities, and in this one is going to be very similar to that. And then we have a 3-step process that's really simple, but we have in that first step is a really loaded step. There's a lot to know here. We're talking about third person plural of the preterite. Tercera persona plural del pretérito. It's this is the one that had all sorts of irregularities. So if you can get to that conjugation, once you get there, then things will really work out well. Now here, the second step, like we did with the present tense, we drop the O. This time we're going to drop R-O-N of the ending. So if you remember those conjugations, I was like hablaron. I'll show you that in a moment. But we had hablaron, and we would conjugate the, in that third person plural, the ellos hablaron, conjugate it, H-A-B-L-A-R-O-N. We drop that R-O-N of the conjugation, and we add these new endings. So I'm going to rewrite these with these endings, which is what that third step is add the endings. So when I started with, as I said, this first step, let me see if I can write another little box over here. So I'm going to start with hablar in the third person plural preterite. That was my first step, right? Was hablaron. Así. Second step was to drop the R-O-N. So I'm going to have H-A-B-L-A-R-O-N. Drop that R-O-N. And then the third step was to add the endings, and I'm going to do that below. So right here, I'm going to take, there's my ending, R-A, and I started with H-A-B-L-A was my new stem. And there it is, hablara. That's my yo form of the past subjunctive. And then here, I'm just going to add my new stem, hablaras. There's the to form of the past subjunctive, el imperfecto de subjuntivo, hablara. Notice, same as the yo form is that third person singular form, just like it was in the present subjunctive. It's going to be like that. Now notice here, this ending right here, I left a little blank here. And actually I should probably add, there's an accent mark here as well. It's going to go right there. There's the accent mark. But I left that blank because that can change depending on what the conjugation is. In this case, I'm going to use the letter A because that is the conjugation. It's hablaron, A-R-O-N. But some of our conjugations are ieron, so we'll have an E there. So I can't put what the ending will be right there, but you'll have to know that it is going to have an accent mark. So we're still going to use our stem, but the last letter of our stem is going to have an accent mark. And that accent mark might be over an A, or it might be over an E, depending on what the third person plural preterite form is. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and show you this with our so as I said, we're going to have our, oh, it's not letting me type, sorry about this. So here, H-A-B-L-L-A should be our stem, but this is that letter that I had underlined with the accent mark. I need to write an accent mark over that A, habláramos. And then here, again, just plug in the stem, HABL and HABL. All right, HABLA. So again, here the stem is HABLA, and really we're just adding Ramos to it. But when I put the ending on there, I put the blank with an accent mark, just so we know that is going to vary depending on what the conjugation ends up. And I'll show you more examples. And actually, most of the irregulars that we'll go over will have E's there, not an A with an accent mark. Now, it might have seemed redundant that we drop the R of RON and then add an R right back. Now, it kind of is. And, this is the form that I prefer. This is the form that we will use mostly in class. This is the form that you're going to see probably more often. But there is another form out there. And this is why I say, to get rid of the R and O and N. Otherwise, you could just look at the rule as just if you got rid of just O and N and then added just as, almost, ice, and on, that might be an easier rule to follow. But the reason why we have that is this. There's another set of endings out there that means the same thing. There's no difference, but certain places will use it more often in Spain but they're both used very often. You're going to see this form more often, this form often enough that it's good to know, be familiar with it. You'll come across it in a lot of reading. You'll hear it. Certain verbs tend to use this a little bit more often than others. You might hear with an haber with this. You'll hear it with poder, querer. You'll hear that a lot. So you should be familiar with it. But if you want to kind of stick with becoming more proficient with this conjugation, that will be fine. And just making sure that you are familiar with this one, because you will hear it, you will see it, you will read it. So we'll go over this one too, but our focus will definitely be on these conjugations with the RA. So if you want to simplify this rule, then you could just theoretically here just say, get rid of the O and N. And then when you add your endings, you're going to add the the as, the amos, ice, and on. And those endings are simpler for sure. Of course, still keeping in mind the accent mark rule. But again, the reason why we do that is because of this. So we have to just, if we had hablar still, actually, let's do comer. Let's do comer this time. So comer, I'll just put it over here. Comer becomes, that's our verb. In the third person plural preterite, it becomes comieron, like that. And then we drop RON. And in this case, we do have to drop the R and O and N. So we have our stem is comier, and then we put it with our ending comiese. Same thing here, we'll just add that comieses. Comiese. Again, same as the present. I'm sorry, the first person singular, the yo form, just like we did in the present subjunctive. The yo and the el usted will be the same. That's why you also tend to hear the yo more often here. You don't usually hear it in the present indicative because it's clearly the yo form when I say como and hablo versus habla and come. But here, comiese yo, comiese ella. Hablara yo, hablara usted. So we will tend to hear yo a little bit more often actually stated. But here, again, we're going to have an accent mark on the letter that's before the S. In this case, it is the E because it's comieron with an E before the RON. So this E is going to have an accent mark on top of it, like that. The rest of our stem was COMI, but E with the accent. And then here, COMI. All right. So there are conjugations. Again, comiese, this is what I came up with here with this form with the SE ones, but it's the exact same thing as saying comiera, using the RA endings instead. And this is the same as Cambiarás. Okay. All right, but like I said, we are going to focus more on these endings. That's what we'll use. And so I'm going to show you some of the, just kind of a little bit of revisiting the preterite problems that we, or preterite conjugations that are irregular. So again, I think we should feel pretty comfortable with the regular conjugations. Hablaron, comieron, escribieron, but there are lots of irregulars with the preterite. Here's one, for example, this one became fueron. So I'll just give you the yo form with these. Here and there, they're both identical, so they'll both be identical in this conjugation as well. Yo fuera. We also learned there with that. This one actually is more, it's a regular conjugation. It doesn't have accent marks in other forms, but in this third person plural, it really does follow the rules. So, we had fueron, drop. Now, if we're just simplifying it and we're just doing the RA endings, you can just simply think of it as drop ON, and then we add A, viera. Dar. Now, this one's pretty irregular because it's an AR verb, but it has the ER on the endings. So, viera. So those are those four irregulars that we learned. We learned those kind of together back with the preterite. And, so they're irregular there, they'll be irregular here. Again, it's a pretty simple rule. Just go to that third person plural preterite, drop the ON and add those endings. But that third person plural preterite is where we have some issues. So here, we're going to add on to some other irregulars. Remember, we had the morpheme verbs like poner. Poner had that PUS in the stem, and then it was a morpheme verb. So we added those endings, which are the regular endings really. It has a different set, but in this case, it's still ieron, pusieron. So this becomes pusiera. Tener was another one with a UV in the stem. So this one became tuvieron, which makes this now tuviera. We also had hacer with an I in the stem. Hacer became hicieron, and then so it will become hiciera. So these are those morpheme verbs. We had I-E-R-O-N as the endings for all three of these types of morpheme verbs. But there was a fourth set that we also learned, verb like decir, traer, or anything that ends in ducir. What they do is they have a J at the end of their stem, and that is important to separate from the other types of morpheme verbs, because here in the third person plural, we actually, instead of having I-E-R-O-N, it's just E-R-O-N for this conjugation. So another little exception that we have to keep in mind. So when we form the past subjunctive, the imperfecto de subjuntivo, we have to spell it that way without that I right there. Like the other ones, you can see a lot of them have the I-E-R-A, I-E-R-A, but not here. All right, so a couple other ones we should be familiar with. Verbs like leer, caer, creer, oír. Those will have a Y in the third person. Remember, we have the extra Y, we change the I to a Y, and we have, so leyeron, that Y is going to keep when we go to this form. So the yo form is leyera. Caer will be the same thing. Cayeron, so cayera. Any verb that ends in UIR, not GUIR, but UIR, where you actually pronounce the U, like construir. Construir will become construyeron with a Y in it again. And construyera will be our past subjunctive yo form, and really the LA Usted form as well. And then on top of this, we also will have to keep in mind any stem changing verb like sentir. Sentir became it's a stem changing verb in the present tense. It's an E to IE, siento, siente, siente. So if it's an IR verb that stem changes in the present tense, we're also going to stem change in the preterite, but in the preterite, it's only a single letter change. So the single letter change is E to I, not E to IE. So in this third person plural form, it's going to be S-I-N-T is our stem, and then we add our I-E-R-O-N. So sintieron. And that means S-I-N-T is also going to be in our conjugation here, sintiera. Let me fix this. The formatting's bothering me. Shouldn't have used a verb as long as construir, I guess. But anyway, the stem changers, there's other ones too that we have to keep in mind. Dormir. Dormir is an O to U-E stem changer, which means it becomes duermo in the present tense yo form. So it's a O to U-E stem changer. But any O to U-E stem changer verb that is, if it's a stem changing verb in the present tense, it's an IR verb like dormir, it will also stem change, but it won't be O to U-E, it'll just be O to U. So D-U-R-M is the stem, and then we would add that durmieron, and then we take that D-U-R-M is still going to be in here, and there's our stem. We add durmiera. So a lot of stuff that you had to remember in the preterite. You have to know all of those things to have success with this past subjunctive. Again, the conjugations, the rules isn't that bad, but that's assuming you are really familiar with these forms. And again, here, pedir, E to I, it's E to I in the present tense, also E to I in the preterite. So maybe not as tricky because it's got the same change that we had to learn before. Okay, so yeah, you can see these conjugations, they're really consistent, all of them. There weren't any exceptions. There weren't anything where we had to do an additional spell change. The spell change happened. It happened already. It happened earlier in the construction in that first step in this third person plural preterite. Once we got to that step, that spell change already happened. We already had our Y. We already had the morph stem. We already had that change. We already had the irregularity. All that stuff took place in that first step. So once you get to that first step, it's very consistent. Now, again, we did learn another conjugation that goes with these, and you can, instead of having the RA at the end, you could replace all the RAs with an SE. So, fuese, diese, diese, pusiese. We're not going to do that very often, but again, you will definitely come across these with those endings. One other thing I do also want to mention is the pronunciation with these. So I showed you these conjugations here. Now, a lot of these look very similar to the future tense without the accent mark. Actually 3 of these should look just like a future conjugation. This third person plural here, this third person singular, which is also the same as the first person singular, and this second person singular. Now in the future, you stress the last syllable. That's why there's an accent mark on that. Here, there is no accent mark. So it's that second to last syllable, the syllable before the R, that's going to be stressed. So it is important to make sure you pronounce these the right way, spell these the right way. This is going to be hablara, hablara. It goes up. The inflection is here on this A right here. Again, no accent mark required here because that's the rule. It should be on that second to last syllable. Again, the stress is right here. Right here. Hablaras, hablara, hablaramos, hablaramos here. This is stressed. That's the third from last syllable, which isn't what our rule is. That's why we write an accent mark on it to show that this is actually stressed, not this. But it's that A before the R. Hablares, hablaran. Now, hablaran, again, that's the past subjunctive. Hablaran, that's future. Hablará, that's future. Hablarás, that's future. Hablaras, past. Hablarás, future. Kind of subtle, but important. Again, that's why you need to have your accent marks when you conjugate in the future, and you need to not have an accent mark when you're conjugating in the past subjunctive. All right, so hope this was helpful. Now, another video you'll see shortly is going to deal with when do we use these conjugations. They're very prevalent in Spanish, very important. You got to know them. So until next time, hasta luego.